The trial of Henry Nowak's killer, Vickrum Digwa, has concluded, and he has been convicted of murder, but this isn't justice. Not because he shouldn't have been convicted, but because two of his family members, who were participatory to the killing, have not been tried yet. Neither have the police officers. They haven't lost their jobs, been stripped of their pensions, despite handcuffing Henry Nowak and letting him drown to death in his own blood as he pled for his life because they thought he did a racism against his killer, and the body cam footage hasn't been released. It exists. It would show why the police were inattentive to Nowak's wounds, despite us learning that he was stabbed in the backs of his legs and his face, as well as in his lungs. But weirdly, they didn't spot any blood or injuries. Weirdly, they took the word of the family who were restraining Nowak after their son, brother, had stabbed him multiple times, fatally. They took his word that Nowak had perpetrated a racist attack against Digwa, pulled his turban off and called him all slurs, even though Digwa was wearing the turban at the scene. They took Digwa's word for it and let Nowak die, and somehow didn't notice his fatal wounds. There's a lot of questions around this, and it gives one the impression that something is being covered up. For those who don't remember the details of the case, Henry Nowak, 18-year-old, British, Polish, student, studying finance in Southampton. And he goes on a night out with his friends, he drinks less than the legal limit to drive, so he's barely even tipsy. He's walking home late at night, chatting to his friends on Snapchat. There's audio of the altercation leading up to the stabbing. He comes across Vickrum Digwa, and Digwa gets in some sort of verbal altercation with him, and Nowak says, "Oh yeah, you're a bad man, are you?" And then Digwa says, "Yeah, I am a bad man." And then it cuts off, and it seems that he attacks Nowak, stabs him at least once. This is presumably the slash to Nowak's lungs. Nowak tries to flee. He gets slashed in the jaw, and on the back of the legs as he's trying to run away. He tries to climb over a bin and a fence to escape. And then somehow, Digwa calls his family. They attend to the scene. The brother and father of Digwa hold Nowak down until the police arrive. They concoct a story that Nowak has racially abused Vickrum Digwa. The mother takes the murder weapon and conceals it, stashing it at home among an assortment of other Sikh ceremonial weapons. So she tries to conceal the murder weapon. The brother and the father, when the police arrive on scene, say that Nowak hasn't been stabbed, that he's the perpetrator of a racist attack, and actually, the murderer Vickrum Digwa is the victim here. Nowak is protesting. The police are nonchalant. He says, "I've been stabbed," and someone says, "I don't think you have, mate." Now, we're not sure whether or not that's the police officers or the brother or father yet. Question that needs to be resolved by the release of the body cam footage, but they've hermetically sealed that for the time being. And then it transpires that not only did Vickrum Digwa steal Henry Nowak's phone and pocket it, but also in the back of the police car, when speaking in another language, presumably Punjabi, he's talking to his brother, and they admit to the stabbing. It gets translated, obviously, because it can be overheard on the police body cam, and someone can speak Punjabi or whatever. No mention of a racist attack, though. Now, Digwa pleaded not guilty, self-defense. The reason? Because despite overwhelming evidence, you see this with the grooming gangs as well, you see this with pretty much any crime that a third worlder perpetrates in our country, they don't care. They don't have guilt. They don't value honesty in and of itself. There is no such thing as accountability on an individual basis in these cultures. Instead, they have a clannish, honour-based morality system, and this transcends Islam. It is a concept in the Indian subcontinent called izzat, face saving. You farm social currency like XP, and you lose social standing if you, or a member of your broader extended family network or clan, do something that invites shame or embarrassment on the broader social unit. And so you have an incentive to lie, cheat, and steal and evade responsibility so that your family doesn't incur the reputation damage costs of your bad behaviour. And so this is why the entire family gets involved. They want to cover up the crime to ensure that none of their members face accountability from the state authority, because they don't see the state as an authority. It's not their state. It's not their country, after all. They just look out for their own. But also, they don't want to incur the cost of Vickrum Digwa's violent behaviour. They don't want the family to suffer, to be shunned by the broader community. Apparently, the broader Sikh community in Southampton is also shunning these people. Apparently, it's been known that this is a violent weirdo for some time. And we should have known this, because this footage was going around for a while. Vickrum Digwa, and who is presumed to be his brother, according to local Sikhs in this video, they get out of their car and argue with another driver. And Digwa, you can see, he's got a great big whopping sword in his hilt. Like, he's walking around in his dress with an actual sword. Not the little kirpan on his neck. There you go, see? Draws a sword, middle of the street. Why wasn't he arrested and deported then? If he was, Henry Nowak would still be alive. Now, deportation is too much of a kindness. He should rot in prison until we return the death penalty and... Well, I can't finish that sentence because I'm on YouTube. But, if someone took action then, when they had the license plate, when he was wielding a blade, Henry Nowak would still be alive. And I'm particularly frustrated by this as well, because I had a recent altercation like this. I had a machete waved at me out of a window in a local park with my wife with me, gave the police the number plate, told them that the local pub had CCTV of the incident, and I've now had to launch a complaint against the police, because the police, within an hour of them calling me back about the incident, with all of the evidence and a profile of the perpetrator and the school that they likely attended, within an hour they sent me a letter saying, nothing can be done, we're just going to close this case now. Egregious. Other officers have been in contact saying, well, that shouldn't be the case. They've got evidence, they've got time, they've got potential footage, they've got the number plate. They've said it's been driving around on stolen plates for a while. They should be able to snatch this guy off the street. It's clear and present danger. But they can't be bothered. They can only be bothered to police racism, which means negative opinions held by the native population of these imported tribal minorities when those tribal minorities do their typical behaviours, which are violent, thuggish, clannish, like Digwa's. And so if the police had acted in this instance, and if we find out there was a police report of this incident, by the way, there'll be public hell to pay for that. But if they'd acted in this instance, if they'd acted in my instance, then, you know, completely preventable atrocities would never have happened. And if you look at the details of the case. So, Robert France, who is the temporary Deputy Chief Constable of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Constabulary, he says the constabulary have referred itself to the Independent Office for Police Conduct, the IOPC, over Henry Nowak's death in custody, because, of course, the officers initially handcuffed Nowak and arrested him for racism while he lost consciousness and bled to death. Well, he drowned in his own blood. And France said the officers had been lied to in a 999 call made by Digwa's brother and had faced an extremely complex crime scene and apologised. Can't have been that complex. Because, again, Nowak was stabbed in the lungs, legs, and face, would have been bleeding profusely, especially if detained in one spot. Would have probably been weak and faint and very distressed because he was injured, trying to escape. Feel his life slipping away from him, and the police seem to have demonstrated callous indifference. They cared more about the hurt feelings of his killer, based on complete fabrications, than they did about poor Henry Nowak's life. The court was told an attack was not witnessed, but neighbours heard Nowak say he'd been stabbed and was dying. So there were auditory witnesses to this. Nowak attempted to escape by climbing over a fence, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Again, so you would have been able to see the blood at the crime scene. If he was bleeding that profusely and leaving a trail of blood, then he would have been bleeding at the crime scene as well. The prosecution said he was stabbed 5 times, including twice in the back of his legs, 1 in the face, and the fatal wound to his chest. So again, Digwa ran after him and slashed at him as Nowak was trying to run away. Because, what, he felt mildly disrespected by Nowak saying, oh, you're a bad man. This Vickrum Digwa is an impulsive, remorseless barbarian. Look at the nothing behind his eyes. He doesn't think he's done anything wrong. And now we've got to pay for his food, his ability to engage in whatever weird tribal custom he would like to behind bars. The roof over his head. We've got to pay for that indefinitely as law-abiding taxpayers. Henry Nowak's family has to go to work to fund the bed and board of his killer, and the killer's mother for the rest of their lives. Because this guy will probably outlive them. It just makes you apoplectic with rage, doesn't it? So then Digwa gave the knife to his mother. It was found at the family home along with more than 20 other Sikh weapons. The court heard how Digwa lied to police, telling them he had been attacked, but not letting the officers know that Nowak had been hurt, so they concealed the stabbing. And that's why he died. He told officers the brothers were restraining Nowak, saying, "I can't let him go until this gets sorted. We're Sikhs, we wear a turban, and he's just attacked my brother," Gurpreet Digwa said. Yeah, prosecute that guy for accessory to murder. Because he would have known that Henry had been stabbed. I mean, if he was restraining him, surely his hands would have been covered in blood. If Henry was bleeding profusely from his legs and his face. And he was told in the back of the police car that his brother had stabbed him. Again, the family all knew. They gave the murder weapon, smothered in blood, presumably, to the mother to conceal. So Gurpreet Digwa, we can only assume that he knew about the stabbing and participated in this fatal charade that cost Henry his life. He added there were no weapons involved, telling police, "I don't know what weapons he would have seen." So they all lied. Temporary Deputy Chief Constable France told the BBC, "This was an extremely complex investigation, and actually the scene itself was extremely complex when the officers arrived. They were lied to in the 999 call by Henry's killer. They were lied to as they arrived at the scene, and we know that as a result, they didn't understand what had happened for several minutes, and that is an absolute tragedy. It is a tragedy that officers did not immediately understand what had happened to Henry. I'm sorry that he had been handcuffed and arrested as he lost consciousness. I don't want to hide the facts. I want people to understand the full facts." Really? That's interesting. One, why do you think an apology is sufficient? Apologies won't bring Henry Nowak back. These police officers need to be named, shamed, stripped of their jobs, of their pensions, and face prosecution as parties to murder. Basically, on the grounds that they were guilty of at least manslaughter, because their negligence and indifference to Henry's suffering led to his death. And then you get, and this is mental, by the way, then you get Hampshire police responding to people questioning them on X in the comments. They say, "Our officers were misled at the scene, including denial of weapon use. They quickly switched to life-saving aid within minutes, but as laid out in our statement, the medical evidence shows that the injuries were not survivable. A very sad case. Our thoughts were with his family." Okay, let's say that the medical injuries themselves, the stab wounds, were fatal, and the officers couldn't have saved Henry's life. Still doesn't excuse the fact they arrested him for racism, ignored his pleas for help, and then only intervened when it was too late. Only intervened when he wasn't breathing. And if that's the case, okay, let's just say the officers were misled, they did nothing wrong, they did their best to save Henry. They couldn't have possibly known that he was stabbed in the face and legs and smothered in blood. They just took his killer's word for it. Okay, where's the footage then? I understand the family might not want footage of their son or brother. I've seen Henry's done lots of like TikTok videos with his sister. They seem really close actually, and it's blimey. You know, I've got 2 kids on the way, probably a boy and a girl. Find out in a few weeks. I mean, if one lost the other, it would be horrible for me, and I couldn't imagine for the sibling. But I can imagine they don't want the footage of their beloved son and brother dying, begging the authorities to save him, plastered across the internet. But I can imagine the police don't want it plastered across the internet because it implicates them. Because what if it was the police officer saying to Henry, when he said, "I've been stabbed"? "I don't think you have, mate." And then it gets worse. Now, these are just rumours. I want to be very clear that these are just rumours. But someone sent a text claiming to have inside knowledge of the situation, seeming to have seen the body cam footage. Maybe it's someone who worked for Hampshire Police. Someone sent a text to Tommy Robinson. He's published it. They alleged that 3 policewomen were at the scene. They've all quit the force. The main policeman that handcuffed him laughed when Henry told him and then dragged him across the gravel. It's all in the body cam footage. There were 2 999 calls. One from his brother. The other was from a lady in a flat that told the police she thought someone had been stabbed. Only one got reported. This makes sense, by the way, because as it says in the BBC article, there was a neighbour that overheard Henry saying, "I've been stabbed," and was trying to get away. So that would make sense. They took Henry's phone and his dad's, and they checked through every single message to see if there had ever been a racist comment or joke. So they posthumously rifled through Henry's effects to try to charge him with racism as a mitigating circumstance for why Digwa would have stabbed him after he bled to death in police custody. And they even went after his father. If these allegations are true, everyone involved needs to be a pariah until the end of their days. Just says, as they thought Henry was a racist and laughed at him when they had told him he had been stabbed, they were also told by a neighbour who believed Digwa. They have apologised, but I think there'll be more to come. And I'm sure there will be. I'm sure, though, that we won't get the publication of any body cam footage until after the IOPC concludes its investigation. It's the same with the Manchester Airport incident, right? We didn't get the body cam footage until, reportedly, one of the police officers who's now on trial for leaked it to acquit his colleagues of any wrongdoing. Because those two thugs were in an argument with some Kuwaiti passenger, and then when they were detained in the car park for assaulting someone, they then decided to break and bloody the nose of a policewoman, punch another woman in the face, attack another police officer. And yeah, too right, they got kicked in the head when they were on the ground. Should have been harder. But the reason the police didn't disclose the body cam footage, the reason they didn't charge them for 150 days, is because when they were being detained and questioned, there was a massive Pakistani mob that assembled outside the police station. And the police know that that's the case. They know that these tribal minority communities imported into our country against our wishes will kick off once one of their most violent, in this case murderous members, faces any accountability. And there's been a circling of the wagons in this case, because the likes of Rupert Lowe have proposed banning the Kirpan, banning the religious exemption that allows Sikhs to carry great big whopping weapons around under a religious exemption. Meanwhile, there was a guy that had a full police squad turn up to his house a few months ago because he was clipping his front garden bushes with a pair of shears. So that's the kind of ridiculous situation that Britain is in. It's actually not ridiculous. It's deeply evil and tyrannical because British women can't carry pepper spray to defend themselves from the migrant rapists that our state has imported, but the migrants themselves can carry whopping great weapons, stab an exemplary young lad to death, and have the police take their side at the murder scene because they accuse him of racism. By the way, the mum got charged as well. Her mugshot is in here. She is an Indian-British dual national. That shouldn't exist, by the way, and we shouldn't be handing out any citizenship grants by fiat. It should be only via inheritance. But people are saying, oh, she should be stripped of her citizenship and sent back to India. No, no, no. She should be given the death penalty. Keep her here, give her the death penalty. It's cheaper than a flight. And the solution to overcrowded prisons is the death penalty. Belmarsh should be empty by the 5th year of a Restore Britain government. That's the hope, at least. But there's two things to take away from here. The first is that our justice system is built for an individualistic, latently Christian, at the very least, morality. Blackstone's formulation, based on the bargain that Abraham makes with God in Sodom and Gomorrah, where he says, if I can find a handful of innocent persons, will you spare this entire city? Meaning it's better to allow 100 guilty men to go free than allow one innocent person to suffer. So we have a very high standard for the presumption of innocence. And in that, we have a default assumption that even the participants of the crime, to an extent, are comprehensible to us. And that the family members of the criminal will turn him over because they fear the consequences. And the criminal is an aberration from our general sense of morality. That most people know right from wrong, even the family members of the criminal, and they'll cooperate with the investigation. That's not the case when you import the tribal politics of the Indian subcontinent. It doesn't matter which religion it is. Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, doesn't matter. They just shouldn't be here. But the second thing is that Henry Nowak died because anti-racism is the sole animating principle of our state and all of its institutions. And this is David Shipley's thesis in his piece for The Spectator. And he concludes the piece by saying the police chose to ignore the evidence in front of them in order to believe the Sikh family shouting about racism. The police ignored the appeals of the 18-year-old white boy bleeding out in front of them. decades of training on anti-racism, fear of being labelled racist, fear of not listening to minority groups. All of these, no doubt, played a part. This pernicious doctrine of anti-racism has captured the police since the Macpherson report labelled them institutionally racist. That was after the Stephen Lawrence murder, where the Macpherson report concluded we were institutionally racist because the police were confessing to the private thoughts of other police officers they could never have known. Also, the Macpherson report and the Stephen Lawrence trial was an exercise in self-flagellation over race relations. There's footage of the suspects being paraded in public by the police with very little security, being pelted with objects outside the Stephen Lawrence murder trial. This was Britain's equivalent of George Floyd. And the consequences of the Macpherson report, this racial self-flagellation, have been disastrous. I mean, it led to the hate crime operational guidance in 2014 from the College of Policing that then produced non-crime hate incidents. Because the consequence of accusing the police of institutional racism is you create a moral extortion racket. And the protection money is the police going after the private thoughts and conversations of members of the public to prove that they are anti-racist enough that they police racism. Not within their own ranks, but within the public. Because, per Sir Robert Peel's dictum when establishing the police are the public and the public is the police. So therefore the police have to police the thoughts of the public to prove the police aren't racist. And the police have to err on the side of defending the hurt feelings of violent minorities to prove they aren't racist, even if it's at the expense of law-abiding young lads' lives, like Henry Nowak. And Shipley finishes, in order to get to the truth of the matter, the police should release all their body cam footage from the incident as a matter of urgency. The trial is concluded, so there can be no concerns around contempt of court. We all need to hear and see exactly what these officers said and did, so the truth of anti-racism can be revealed. I think you'll be prying that footage from their cold, dead hands. It'll drop unexpectedly. Probably after a trial of Digwa's brother, perhaps father, and the conclusion of the IOPC investigation into the police. But even so, I don't think those officers will face repercussions. And I hate to be pessimistic about this, but we've seen every scandal, right? Even all the way up to the Epstein files. That there's very little appetite within our institutions to hold themselves accountable, even though the public demand it, even though the legitimacy of any institution rests on its ability to deliver its promises and punish betrayals. And so the state has been rendered illegitimate in the eyes of not just these tribal minorities who don't consider it an authority, don't want to live according to our laws, don't respect the lives of our sons and daughters. Will end them at the slightest impulse that they have been disrespected. But also it's now illegitimate for us, because it isn't interested in protecting us, it's interested in policing our dislike of being demographically replaced and violently brutalized in our only country. And so the longer this goes on, the less legitimate the state will become. And I'm okay with that, actually. I'm fine with pretty much all the leadership of the police being sacked, stripped of their pensions and shunned. I'm fine with all of these 20th century taboos being thrown out. I'm fine with us getting back to a normal country where we can assert our preferences and prejudices again. However, in the meantime, more lives will be ruined, more lives will be taken. And I'm not willing to have that be the price that we pay for getting our country back. But thanks to the religion of anti-racism, I think we're going to be forced to pay that price anyway. And so I can only finish this video with my condolences to the family of Henry Nowak. I don't know what it's like to lose a son. My family do. My uncle died in 2008. We're not sure actually whether he was killed or committed suicide, but nevertheless, I saw how that broke family apart for a very long time. They've never gotten over it. And so I'm very sorry. And I'm sorry that justice hasn't been done for you yet. But it has to.